Right, so welcome to this session, our 10th session in this course, and welcome to people who are coming for the first time. So what we're looking at in this course is outdoor learning in the curriculum for Wales, and this week we are focusing in on the AOL of expressive arts. So expressive arts and how to teach that outdoors. So I'm going to share my screen with you now so that you can see the PowerPoint, which you will be sent afterwards. So hopefully you can see that. And we're going to be focusing in on all aspects of the expressive arts AOLE, which is really quite vast, but I'm going to focus in on what's important in use of the outdoor learning. So I'm not saying that we could necessarily teach everything to do with expressive arts using outdoor learning, but there's certain aspects of it that lead well into the use of outdoor learning for it. A bit of housekeeping, first of all, please keep your microphones on mute. At the end, when there's questions, and if you want to ask a question, then please feel free to unmute and to ask away. But obviously we get feedback. As I said, we are recording this session, and you will be sent out a recording of this session once I've edited it to make sure it's all it sounds good. And that will be sent to you on Hub, if you've got a Hub email with your Eventbrite booking, or on WeTransfer. And please do download it on WeTransfer because it will go out of date. If it goes off and you lose your recording, then please email me and I will send you again. That's fine. But the WeTransfer will run out. Use the chat function if you'd like. Some people have been already putting in where they come from. That's fantastic. It's really useful for me to know whereabouts we're focusing our training here. And also you can see where you are individually as well. We will be using a breakout room at the end. So what I tend to do is go through the content of the AOLEs, go through the ideas, and then at the end you have a chance to chat to other people to either think about what we've gone through today, try and find out what's useful for you, and also get some other ideas from other teachers of what they've used the outdoors for in terms of expressive arts. So see if you can magpie any ideas from them. So we will have time to do that at the end because the session is not quite as long as the ones we've done before, unless I start going on, which I probably won't because I've got a bit of a sore throat. These are my contact details. Please do follow me on Twitter if you want to find out about Eventbrite and about any more training. And also I've got a Facebook page and Nature Days is my Facebook page, and it's at Dawn Nature Days for the Twitter feed. So what are we doing today? So today I'm going to go through the What Matters statement content and how progression occurs through each of the What Matters statements for this AOLE expressive arts. Then I'm going to give you the practical ideas for teaching all the What Matters statements and the special considerations using the outdoors as a resource. Now, it's important that we think about the key considerations for this area, and I'll talk about those a bit later, because there's an awful lot of the content in this AOLE, a bit like it was in the humanities AOLE. So the What Matters statement is slightly different in this one of our areas. So outline of the curriculum. So just going through the curriculum and what the content is in terms of the What Matters statements, and then practical ideas for coverage. We've got What Matters, there's only 3 What Matters statements, starting with exploring, and then reflecting on art, and then creating art. So it's quite interesting. There's only one of the What Matters statement which is actually about the actual production of the art itself, the creation. Just in case, a quick reminder of the new curriculum and how the curriculum is set out. So it's divided into these AOLEs, and expressive arts AOLE is divided into just 3 What Matters statement. Each of those What Matters statement is divided into 5 progression steps. And the first progression step is where the students should be, or the learners should be, by the end of age 5. So that's the end of nursery reception. And progression step 2 is when they are at the end of age 8, which is kind of equivalent to Key Stage 1. Progression step 3, end of age 11, so end of primary. Progression step 4, end of age 14, so end of Key Stage 3. Progression step 5, age 16, Key Stage 4. We will be focusing in on progression step 1, 2, and 3. So we're going to be focusing in on primary only. I'm not going to be looking at progression steps 4 and 5 today. Now, when you're looking at the curriculum, the new curriculum, and you're looking at it at Hub probably, it's really important that you look in the other parts of the actual curriculum. It doesn't just have it in the descriptions of learning. It's also got these special considerations. And the special considerations provide you with the content that they want you to cover. So it's actually, there's an awful lot in there. And what it says in the special considerations for expressive art is that the area spans 5 disciplines. So the discipline of art, dance, drama, film and digital media, and music. So these disciplines share this creative process, which the What Matters statements are all basically covering. And they each contribute transferable skills and knowledge to the learner's experience. So it doesn't really matter which one of those disciplines you're covering, the What Matters statement actually refers to all of them. It's also really important to note that the statements of the What Matters statements are really interlinked, and you really cannot teach them in isolation. So in the past, when I've done my training, I've gone through What Matters Statement 1, and I've told you how you can teach that. That doesn't work for expressive arts because it's a whole continuum and they are all interlinked. So it's a process that goes from What Matters Statement 1 to 2 to 3. So we're going to go through the whole of the content of the What Matters Statement and the curriculum and the special considerations, and then I'm going to go through how to actually teach using the outdoors to cover all that content. So also there is the key considerations of this area are not really a prescribed content. They say that it's just what you should consider. They couldn't possibly prescribe the content they've mentioned because it is enormous, and they divide it into those 5 disciplines. So there's an awful lot that's actually being covered in detail here. So there's terms that are considered that they think that you should include when you're covering creative arts, but you shouldn't be trying to cover all of this. It just would be impossible. So this is just a word cloud that describes what they would suggest that you cover in the arts section. So we've got starting with things like line and shape and texture and color and design and form. And then you're moving on to more complex things, looking at scale, perspective. But then it also expands out into some uses of art. So we've got like architectural design, advertising, animation, textiles, ceramics. So it's not just drawing, we're moving into some practical tasks as well, some practical expressive arts. So environmental art, fashion, and then using some digital as well. So communication, graphics, and then jewelry and body ornament, illustration, interactive design, multimedia, packaging, signage, sound art. So it is huge, just this 1/5 of the content. So it does open up so many avenues. So do look at those considerations, because it might give you some really good ideas of what you could use that you may not have covered before. In terms of the dance, again, just as many different elements to it, but they do divide it into certain things that you must cover. So they expect you to cover performance as well as choreography, and also an appreciation across a range of styles. And they've divided it into a range of some of the important aspects here. So they're looking at movement. So that the movement in terms of timing, rhythm, phrasing, improvising, how you use the space, how you use your body. They also look at choreographic devices, so how you can use your body to highlight things and to create climaxes and develop and use repetition. The compositional structure of your dance, obviously the beginning, the middle and the end, but also themes and narratives and logical sequence and transitions and how you include those in your dance as well. And then dance composition, so the types of dance, so pure, abstract, lyrical, dance drama, so different ways in which you can use the dance. Then the performance element, they include trying to refine it, so you use physical elements to make sure that you're looking at the actions you're using, the postures, your alignment, your balance, coordination, flexibility, strength, stamina. So much about the performance there as well. And then, of course, the expressive side of it, projection, and also using your musicality, that phrasing and your facial expressions, as well as your body as well. And then lastly, we've got the technical considerations. So reproducing your movement in a stylistic or an accurate way. So using the technical references to the different dance types, using different timings to make sure that you're doing it accurately and the technique is there. So this, again, this word cloud just covers some of those aspects that they suggest that you actually do cover. And the performing side of it, again, it's only just one of the many ways in which you should be doing it. There should be this chance for you to actually undertake the performance, but also appreciation. So it's not just you have to be a dancer to do this. You can actually appreciate other people as well. Moving on to the next one. So we're looking at drama now. And again, these are quite obvious things that you need to include when you're covering drama, but they really specify that you have to include obviously acting in there, but you also need directing, design, and then some technical theatre and arts administration. So again, if you've got people who are not involved in drama, the acting side of it, you've got aspects that they can still develop. So on the drama side, you're looking at plot and character, relationships, and creating tension or focus, and deriving the language, the voice, encompassing the different types of voices like pitch and tempo. Obviously, you've got movement and the gestures, including facial expressions, the atmosphere that you can design, and then things, the technical side, stage lighting, sound, set, hair, makeup, costume, script writing, directing, stage management. And then the different types that they expect you to cover: comedy, tragedy, tragicomedy, farce, musical theatre, melodrama, mime, physical theatre. So again, huge amount in there in the drama section. Moving on to the film and digital media. Now, within this aspect of the considerations, they expect you to include things like television, film, radio, games designs, photography, live events, theatrical production skills, print media, social media, sound, and audio production. So again, a very big one, which fits in nicely with lots of the digital aspects of the science AOLE. And what we're thinking about is creating films, obviously, but also editing, post-production, use of the 3D and the 2D space, sound, lighting, photography, cameras, narrative, so the style and the genre, thinking about your audience, your composition, what form you're going to create it, if it's going to be live action or animation or audio or written. Virtual reality is in there. And then with the sound, there's loads of opportunities for sound outdoors, which I'll go through. But you've got obviously sound recording with video and filming, and then animating and putting documentaries and music videos together. You've got print media, radio podcasts, and then this also brings in the photographing and graphics, virtual forms, and audio production, lighting design, stage design. So fits in with the drama side of it, but obviously on the digital side. And we get game design in here, event design, and product design. So feeds into some of the technical science and technology AOLE as well. Music, again, like the drama, it specifies that you need to include performing, but also improvising, composing, listening, and appreciation. Within the performance side, you need to make sure they understand these terminologies such as pitch, melody, dynamics, texture, and structure, and the musical devices like repetition, harmony, and also the different ways in creating in composition, so the sonatas or the variations, the themes, etc. In performing, they need to have a go at things like vocal performing, but also instruments, but also using technology such as DJing, improvising, and composing using your voice or using different instruments. That could be acoustic, could be electrical, could be digital, but then included in that is editing and production as well. And listening, of course, so analyzing, evaluating, and appreciating a range of musical forms, styles, and genres from past and lots of different periods of time. Ooh. So that is what the special considerations are. We're now going to consider the what matters statement. Now, the what matters statement should be a guide for what you're actually covering within this AOLE. But in fact, the what matters statement actually identifies the creative process. So a bit like we've went through the inquiry process when we looked at the science AOLE, we looked at the other inquiry process where you have in humanities as well. So this is another process that you need to understand in order to teach this expressive arts AOLE. And this covers all expressive arts. So that's why the what matters statement cover everything and why you can't do them in isolation. So these 5 stages, there aren't 5 what matters statements, because one of them you don't really do a lot. But it does cover all of these within the what matters statement. If you haven't heard of the creative process, then you probably do it automatically. It's just identifying those key areas and giving the students and learners time to actually make sure that they are covering those, so they're actually getting to the end point. So what matters statement 1 really covers this first stage in the creative process, this preparation. And it involves preparing your work and generating ideas. So the best way to use the outdoors in this way is to basically immerse yourself in it so that you get inspiration for your creativity. Now, in terms of many of the other AOLEs, this is something that would just happen in foundation phase. You just experiment with things, you just play with things, just explore. Whereas in the expressive arts, it needs to happen at every progression step. You need to be immersed, you need to explore, you need to either research or just experiment with things before you can start to think about joining the creative process by making your own version of something. So preparation is key. The second stage is called the incubation stage. And once you've finished actively thinking about your idea, so you've actually got something in your head based on what you've prepared yourself with by reading stuff and in being involved in exploring outside, then you need to consider not doing anything with that investigation. So you've got that idea in your head, but it needs to almost simmer for a bit. So you don't actually work on it. That's why it's called incubation. So you step away from the idea, you sit down and let it just brew, and it starts to flesh itself out into a meaningful idea. So as this incubation takes place at the back of your mind, then obviously you might not actually be seeming to do anything. But as you're exploring ways of experimenting, bringing things together, combining ideas and making diverse ideas, using those influences from your preparation stage to bring ideas together to come up with a new creative idea, that's your incubation phase. Next stage is the illumination. And again, not a lot will happen. It's just suddenly it all clicks. You suddenly see the creative problem solved. You have an idea of how you are going to use all that preparation material that's been incubated in your head to turn it into a piece of creative art. Okay, so it's a spontaneous new connection that you've formed with the material that you've gathered in the preparation process, and you've come to a solution based on the problem that was given to you when you were tasked with this creative problem. So it might be an aha moment, it might be developing over time, but it will be that you know where you're starting from. It's not going to be the end product, it's just going to give you an avenue to go down. Really important that we then move on to the evaluation phase. Now, the evaluation phase is looking at that idea that you've had and weighing it up against alternatives. So you might be comparing your idea to other artists' creations and see how they've used it. You may be coming across problems. So you might think, right, well, I can't see how I'm going to make this work. Let's have a look at what other artists have done, see if I can get some ideas from them. And reflecting and being critical about your design, or even critical about other ones, and evaluating it and saying how you can use what you've learned to make your creative art better. So it gives you some time to reflect and look back at your initial concept or the initial problem and see if your solution aligns with what your initial vision was, and whether actually, no, this isn't going to work, or whether, yes, I'm on the right path. So evaluating, refreshing, changing your design, going back to it, really important. And then last of all, we've got implementation or verification. And this is when it all happens. So this is when you actually start to create your expressive art product, or this the thing you're actually going to make. So this is when you start to get those ideas on paper or in creative form. You create your music, you create your dance, you create your sculpture, whatever it is. This is when you actually start to build it. So this leads into the what matters statement 3, which is the actual creative, as in building or making or doing or performing side of it as well. So that's the creative process, and that is what we are looking at when we actually look at the what matters statement. So hopefully you can see how you couldn't really do one of these what matters statements in isolation. It just wouldn't work. So what we're going to go through, I've made a spreadsheet here of all of the what matters statement for all the progression steps for each of the what matters statements, so you can see them in a glance. This is the problem I find with the hub curriculum, is that when you're scrolling across the pages, it's hard to see it. So you can see it all on one page here. And you can see that the what matters statement 1, this exploring, this first stage of the creative process, starts at progression step 1 when you're just experimenting and exploring with some materials. But in fact, at every single progression step, you are still exploring and experimenting. Really important that they have a chance to actually try things out and experiment and fail and change it. So you can see that there's a pattern that we don't ever lose that explorative inquiry into our expressive arts. It never goes away. You've always got to start with that. What changes as we go through the progression step is maybe the type of technique you have and the depth that you go into it and the processes that you use. And you're starting to evaluate some of those. But realistically, you've got the same process taking place, just at maybe a higher level. You're also starting to question and discover other creative works. So you're starting to think about why creative works are made and asking questions to develop your own answers. So why are you going to use this term a certain way? And trying to relate it to your personal, social and cultural identity, because you're expressing yourself. So you don't want to just copy somebody else's. To express yourself, you need to be aware of what part of your personality or your social or cultural identity you're trying to actually dig into, and that again is part of your preparation phase. And then the last one of these parts of the what matters statement is how trying to identify how artists use their feelings and their moods within their creative work. So how are they using color? How are they using movement to actually try and relate feelings, and how does that impact your audience? So very, you know, quite an in-depth thing to actually consider, but we're considering it all the time, because if you're trying to make an impact with your expressive arts, you need to be aware of the mood that you're actually trying to aim to generate in your audience. So in summary, the what matters statement 1, this exploring, the start of the creative process or the creative technique, covers exploring. So we're exploring these techniques, we're exploring artwork, we're exploring stimuli. We're also thinking about why we creative work is made. So think about the reason behind it. How does your personal experience feed into this expressive arts? How artists have communicated mood. What can you take from that to use to help make yours a meaningful piece of work? And then the impact of your art on the audience. How are you going to do that, and how have artists done that in the past? So that's the first what matters statement. So we're going to move straight on to the second what matters statement before I give you any ideas. So starting with, when we get onto progression step 2, we're looking really at that reflective side. So it's that 4th stage in the process. And obviously you need to do some research for this as well, because we're looking at our own pieces of work, but also looking at others and comparing ours to other pieces of artwork. So it could be famous artists, it could be our fellow students, it could be that we're comparing ours to natural nature, pieces of art in nature. So we're just comparing these and seeing how it changes, how people's reflection in their art changes over time and over places. And again, we're looking at that mood and those emotions and how they communicate through the creative works, and if there is variation with different types of people and different types of artwork. So what we're going to be covering into involves reflecting on yours and others' work. The progression moves, if I just go back and show you the progression steps, what we're moving from, because there doesn't look like a lot of difference between the progression steps, but the progression involves moving from just listening and responding to the pieces of art to giving and accepting constructive feedback and then reflecting on this to make improvements. So we might just want to have basic feedback, but then when we get to progression step 5, we're critically and thoughtfully responding to what people think of our pieces of art. We've got this comparison between our creative work to that of others and from others' spaces and times. So we need to understand the context of the creative work and reflect on how artists have used techniques to produce meaning and communicate moods and emotions and what we can take with that. And then when you get to higher progression steps, these are reflections evolve into critically evaluating their work and other artists' work. So this is what matters statement 2 covers, this reflection. And then the last what matters statement is the creating side of it. So this is the coverage of, includes all the important aspects of the actual creation process itself. So we're looking at planning, communicating, using a range of discipline-specific techniques. So all those techniques required to learn about those 5 disciplines, about dance, drama, digital, music, and art, that's covered all in this one what matters statement. So this is the doing. So how do we use a paintbrush? How do we use our bodies to design dances? How do we use our voice to show different drama techniques? And so there's much more within this one, of course. And we need to make sure that we're covering all of this with all of your 5 disciplines. So it's designed really into 2 different areas. You've got the creation process, which means you've got to follow the whole creation process that I went through, that 5 stages. So the planning, but we also need to communicate what we've created. We need to use a range of disciplines. So these specific techniques that were identified in the special considerations, that's when you're covering those. You also need to create your design, but also go through this design process where you modify it and then develop it. And of course, we need to perform and exhibit and share our creative work so that others can then reflect on it and use what matters statement 2 to reflect and then improve. Alongside this process, you're going to be building these creative problem-solving skills, which happen naturally when you're undertaking the creative process. You're building resilience, even if it's just resilience to do things wrong and then keep going and try again, or also resilience when you get criticism for your piece of work. You don't take it to heart, you look at that and you think of it constructively and you make your artwork better. Flexibility, especially when planning a piece of artwork and it doesn't go the way you planned. Brilliant in outdoor learning, because of course things usually don't go right when you're outdoors, because nothing's a straight line and nothing goes the way it's planned because there's so many variables there. Imagination, obviously when you're creative you have to use your imagination, and so inspiration from the outdoors is really useful for that. Safe tool usage. When you're doing outdoor learning, there's a huge amount of tools that you can use outdoors that are more difficult to use indoors to create your creative art piece. Choosing the right material for the job. So this links in also with the technology side of the science and technology AOLE. So that's ways of linking cross-curricular between finding the right material that would work in the environment that you're going to use it, but also making sure it does what you want it to do in a creative way. And really importantly, considering your audience. So what mood are you going to be trying to get them to go into, but also is it appropriate for them? Are they going to be able to access what you're trying to say? So that is all the content of the Expressive Arts AOLE. I hope that makes sense to you. But what we're going to focus on now for the rest of the session is how to teach all that content, so all those ideas in the special considerations, following that creative process using the outdoors. Now, I don't need to explain how to use the outdoors for teaching the creative process, because for every idea I give you, you would follow that creative process probably to actually get to that end result. Or you could focus in on certain aspects. So you might be focusing in on the creative bit. Sometimes you might be focusing in on the planning bit and getting inspiration, or you might be focusing in on the reflective bit. But you must make sure that you are incorporating some of those, or at least one of those what matters statements. So starting with progression step 1, we're going to be thinking about what you could put in your continuous provision. So because the what matters statement are all part of this progression of the creative process, and we can't really look at them in isolation, I've tried to just put in things that you could then inspire them to start to work out the creative process for themselves. Because a bit like the inquiry process when we went through in humanities, if they can work out how to be creative and explore and experiment with that, then when you're starting to put structure within that, then they're really well skilled already. So when you're putting in aspects of expressive arts into your continuous provision, you should really think at the back of your mind, what are you expecting them to do that is creative within this? Now, I've written here a music wall. Now, I know every nursery and reception has a music wall. And I just wonder how much your students actually use it, but also how creative are they being? Are they just being very repetitive? And is it ending up just being something on the wall that they just ignore? So instead of just putting up a music wall or seeing your music wall as it is already, think about testing it and seeing how the learners can be inventive. So don't just leave it up there to go rusty. I've seen so many rusty music walls, but add and take away instruments and also task learners to make something specific. So I get them to try and make a specific song or repeat it, and then maybe record it even on an iPad, or get them to repeat rhythms or tunes. And it doesn't have to necessarily be you there. It could be that they're trying to repeat rhythms that they can hear. Could be rhythm of the wheels of the bikes as they go around the yard. Could be the rhythm of the wind in the trees. Could be rhythm of a bird that they can hear. So the key to using these walls to actually help with your expressive arts and creative process is to give them a reason to use it and get them to start reflecting on how they can use it in a more imaginative way by taking things away, adding things, maybe putting things there that aren't obviously musical instruments. On the Padlet that I've got, I will show you the link at the end. I've put a link to an organization that does music sculptures for your school grounds. They're very nice, they look great, and they're recycled, but it gives you some ideas of ways in which you can use recycled materials in different ways. So I know everyone's got pots and pans and things, and those whammy tubes. So thinking about things that aren't quite as obvious. So we've got here a picture on the right here. Obviously you've got some drums and different materials up there, but also tubes with, if you use flip-flops and you hit the bottoms of tubes, especially if they're different lengths, you can make some proper music, some proper tunes there. So thinking about almost a big xylophone, outdoor xylophone, you can do that with wood, but also if you can use it with plastic, then you know it will last, and they can start to use it in different ways, either by tapping it or whacking the flip-flop on the bottom, and that pushes the air out and you get the different tones that come out. So try and expand on the use of your music wall so that it is much more adventurous than just staying there the same all the time. Loose parts. So we're going to be talking about art now. So this is going to be focusing in on we're going to be focusing on lots of different, all the 5 ones, but in terms of art, loose parts are a fantastic way to explore color, form, and pattern. So just leaving those out in your continuous provision, they can start to explore either pulling them apart or just arranging them. So thinking about the form, the color, the pattern, giving them the opportunity to color match maybe, and also maybe to rub them, to squish them, just to really explore. So that's the whole point of this continuous provision here, to explore this texture, the form. And again, if you add clay in there, you can embed it in there, but just letting them feel it and see how colors change and see how loose parts can be used to make different patterns. A clay, again, experimenting with shape and texture. So if you can provide some tools or some natural materials, they can use them to embed into the clay to make different textures. And you can start to see how that varies with different, loose parts that you can find, either ones that you provide for them or the ones that they can use in their local area, in their outdoor area, that they can collect themselves. Now, the rain provides a really good way of changing your artwork. So I love doing rain pictures. So if you get big pieces of, you can use sugar paper, but watercolor paper is even better. You can just draw on it with watercolors, or watercolor pencils are great. Or you can actually use spices like turmeric or paprika and just sprinkle it on the paper. And then when it rains, obviously this goes outside in the rain, and as the rain lands on it, the water moves all that colors all the way around, and you get this amazing abstract picture, which you can then try and see where the picture is and what it shows you, and kind of try and get the mood from it that the rain has given you. You can also use puddles to actually mix colors as well. So if you've got big puddles in your school ground, you can use powder paint, or again spices or watercolors, and you can mix up colors in those puddles themselves. So the yard, it becomes your paint palette, and then you can use that to paint onto material. If you put it on big washing lines, you can do huge bits of art there, or you can do obviously your easel with a big piece of paper as well. But think about, you know, outside painting in the rain using material that's going to actually capture that waterproof paint. That's a really good way of using the rain as your expressive art maker, really working together with it. Role play. Now, obviously you're going to do role play, and you do that inside a lot, but how about bringing that outside to try and get some of that dramatic energy? So trying to think about roles that are outdoors that we could put into our role play area, so they could actually try and recreate some of those jobs. So it could be something really silly, or something simple like a lollipop man, or it could be tree surgeons, explorers, archaeologists. So if you provide them with the clothes, but also provide them with something to play with, they can start to talk like an archaeologist or talk like an explorer, providing them with magnifying glasses, hats and sand and paintbrushes and spades to dig with. And again, just using that experience, they can still start to come up with some of the really good vocabulary, and trying to find their place within this dramatic inquiry. And then lastly, Haperzone. I don't know whether you've heard of this. This top left picture here is Haperzone. You might want somebody to actually look after this session. You don't really want it left on their own, the learners, because what you do is you get any leaves, works really well with flowers as well, and you place it on top of a piece of calico. You can actually use bed sheets or pillowcases, and it works really well if you do it on top of a log. You place the leaves on top of the calico, and you can either fold the calico over, so you've got double layer, or you can just bash it with a stick. So you bash on top of the material, and then it leaves an imprint of that plant. And you can make some amazing designs like that, and you can use them for creating flags or for making bunting. And it's a great way of getting the colors from autumn onto a material in a really easy print way. So that's a bit of textiles there as well. So what I'm going to go through now is how to teach art in not your continuous provision. These are things that you'll need to have in your in an established session. Excuse me. And it's ways in which to explore some of those content that was mentioned in the key considerations. So all of these photos are all artworks that I've created with students, and they're trying to cover, well, as many of those aspects of the arts section that we did. So starting at the bottom, we've got leaf outlines here. So again, if you're looking at line as your aspect of art that you're covering, then you could just draw around leaves. Gives you a great way of just focusing in on the shapes that they are. This way is actually just, I've put the leaves down and then just with a paintbrush, a flat paintbrush, just patted all the way around. So what you're using is that negative as the picture. So you take the leaf away, and the negative of the leaf goes leaves that outline shape, and this gives you a fantastic form there. And again, you can use the colors that you want to show the different times of the year. So looking at the autumn leaves, you can use leaf printing as well. So that's the opposite. So you put the paint on the leaf and then you print it onto the paper. And so you can use that, and you get the lovely textures and all the shapes of the veins and everything on the leaves. And then leaf rubbing, again, a fantastic way of getting all those different textures onto a piece of paper. So all those different ways. If you are doing leaf rubbing, really good way of doing it is to get a clipboard, put your leaf on the clipboard, put your paper on top of the clipboard, and then rub with the side of your crayon. If you try and do it without a hard surface, then it doesn't really work. So it takes a bit of practice, but the students absolutely love doing it. And again, you can use this to build up an ID guide if you want to build in some of the science AOLE as well. So we've got leaves, and all their shapes and sizes provide you with that natural variation in color. And so trying to collect the different colors there and to try and match it up. So you could do color matching. So if you get those color palette swatches that you get from B&Q, and then put double-sided sticky tape down it, and then they have to go out and try and find something that's the same color and stick it on next to it. So you're finding those colors. And this picture in the middle is similar to that. So you've got a piece of paper with double-sided sticky tape, but each person's been given a different texture to try and find. So you can find smooth items and then rough items. And so those textures have all been collected, and then you can use those to create collages, and looking at the way in which texture can be used to show different aspects of your art. Sticking with texture, on the top left here, this is salt dough, and I've used here fossils and different shells to create different textures into that salt dough. And again, you can do that with clay as well. And it just gives you some fantastic opportunities to see how different textures that you feel can create these different patterns. And there's lots of repeating patterns you get when you start using texture to make imprints. I've also got the middle picture on the left. This is an unnatural mobile. So this is from litter, but of course you can make natural mobiles as well. So collecting items, tying them onto string, or putting them onto bits of sticks. If you've got a stick, especially if you've got youngsters, you've got a stick, make sure it's got not a sharp end, but the end isn't too blunt. And then you just push leaves onto it. So you've got almost making a magic wand with lots of different leaves on it. Flowers are really good for that, especially you've got things like rhododendrons. And then you start to get that pattern. You could do a repeating pattern, or you could just be completely free in your creation. You can make necklaces like that. What I like to do is get tiny little sticks, and then I sharpen them, tie a bit of raffia to the end, or you can use string, give them a long length of string with a big knot at the end, and then they collect their leaves, and then they pierce each leaf with the stick, and then pull it onto the string, and then basically thread them all on, and you end up with a fantastic necklace made out of all the different leaves or flowers if you've got enough flowers. On the right hand side here, we've got natural weaving with twigs. If you can find a forked stick, then you can use that to do weaving. It takes a bit of preparation. This is probably for brushes step 3 really. So if you want to do just leaf weaving, you need to put on the warps. So that's going from left to right. So you need to tie lots of strings along the middle. Or if you want to just do it randomly, then they can just weave backwards and forwards and do a completely creative design. It's great to give them the opportunity to plan it and to come up with a design and then have a go, because usually it's very much more difficult to do the plan that they had. So they have to refine it and change their design, and then they get to reflect on the process. So it's a really nice activity to go through that creative process. Also, if you teach them how to do some lashing, like in this picture here on the right, this is lashed into a star shape, or you can use elastic bands, and then you can then thread and weave different shapes into it as well, different colors, also different natural materials. If you want to use a circle, you can use willow to create a circle, and then you can weave across it. You can make dream catchers. Dream catchers are actually very difficult technically, because you have to tie off every single one, because otherwise you finish it, and then suddenly all the strings all fall down to the bottom and your web collapses. So again, a bit of planning required and a bit of experimenting required for it to stay still. You can see this person has had that problem. So they're keeping their strings apart by putting pins in those yellow blobs. So a lot of experimenting and a lot of exploring required using natural materials to create these weaving ones. Using loose parts, if you haven't got loose parts in your school ground, you may have to bring some in, but things like pebbles will provide you with the opportunity to create arts using balance. So you can just do towers, And again, it just gets you that you're really building that problem solving of resilience in. Trying to build a tower, who could build the tallest tower, thinking about cementing those stones in between, thinking about sizing, the selection of material, the shape of the material. And then once you get expert in doing your towers, you can also progress to try and do an archway, which is incredibly difficult, but it really gets you to start problem solving about the form of the material you're using and how it's going to stay together. And of course, you've got the science coming in as well. For a slightly more creative side in terms of less technical, but also thinking about mental health as well, mandalas are a fantastic way of using loose parts to create a form, which is a form of expressive arts, but it's also a really good meditative process. So collecting the items, so especially in autumn, this is great, different colored leaves, thinking about the form it's going to be. So this one in the middle is just a free form one. So we've got a spiral rotational symmetry there. So thinking about what materials are going to go where, thinking about trying to find the material that's got the right symmetry or the right shape or form, thinking about size as well, and trying to be as creative as you can, but also visually, how does it look? Or you could start to do one as a class. I did a huge mandala as a school the other day. And what I did is I drew a huge circle on the grass and then divided the circle into 15 and each with string. And then each wedge of the circle was given to a pair in the class, and it was their job to create something within that. So the pattern was within each of those 15 wedges, like spokes in the wheel, and together they created this amazing mandala, but they each had an individual place to actually work, because you do find, especially with youngsters, key stage, well, year 3 and below, really, they not so good at the collaborative artwork building, and they tend to walk on top of each other's artwork, especially if you're doing ephemeral art like this on the ground. So just be aware that if you're building something and everyone's walking past what you're building, it can get very frustrating. So sometimes it's great to demarcate an area, which is what this top right picture has. This is underneath a tree. This pattern here is placed into the ground by using wool, which has been stabbed into the ground with a tent peg so that it stays in the ground. And they've made this created this amazing pattern that's extending the roots out. And then we were each given just a different area to actually use whatever we had to create whatever creative form we wanted to. So you've each got a little area to work with, and you can stick with colors, you can start change textures. Again, it gives you free range, but it's nice to sometimes have a collaborative artwork piece but actually have your own little area to work on. On the right hand side, this is a nice piece of art that I like to do, is they are creating a piece of art, a sculpture. So using materials, here we're on the beach, so we were using stones and seaweed, and they plan out what they're going to create. So it might be that you're using nature to inspire you, so you're drawing an animal or a plant that you see, or a landscape that you see. You create half of it, and then you swap places with somebody else, and they finish your sculpture, and they can use whatever form they like to finish your sculpture. It doesn't have to be. And it kind of gets you to let the audience, or let the other person, go take the piece of artwork their way, so you don't get quite so precious about it. And it's a very nice way of building collaborative artworks. So they're working independently on their own, but then they swap, so they're working collaboratively after that. Collaborative art is also fantastic if you want to do it outside using large pieces of paper or large materials. I like sheets. So we've got an artwork here. So again, having space for everybody to draw. What I do is I roll out a huge roll of paper. If it's windy, I put clipboards in to clip it down onto the ground, and obviously stones to keep it down, and then put a whole load of paint trays all the way around it. And then they do their own little bit, but it comes together as a whole, and you try and draw it together. So they've all got a theme. So they're either drawing the view or drawing something that they want to share, and it's a whole communal class project. It's a lovely aspect that you've got there. Still staying with the art, what we're looking at now is using things in nature to create those artworks. So in the middle here, we've got natural paints. There's so much that you can use to create natural paints. I've actually made a video on natural paints on my YouTube channel. So if you go on to hashtag nature days, you look on YouTube, there's a whole video there on how to make natural paints. But obviously there's lots of flowers that you can use. Stinging nettles, great to make lovely greens, but also mixing in some of those spices is good as well. So it's almost like making potions, but you need to make it a bit drier than a potion is. And sometimes the material that you're using doesn't bash down into a liquid paint very well, but if you take it in your hand once you've crushed it and you rub it on the paper, then it does give a really nice color. And usually it's not necessarily the color you can see, so it's really nice experimenting with what colors you make. And natural paint brushes, they're quite interesting. Students get quite frustrated with natural paint brushes because they expect them to work the same as normal paint brushes, and they don't. So you're looking at natural paint brushes as a way of changing the texture in your brush strokes. So finding different materials that can make different textures, you put them onto your stick, tie it with elastic bands, and then you just dip that into paint and then just dip it or dab it onto the paper. So you're not trying to make perfect lines like a paintbrush. The whole point is that you get weird textures, a bit like when you're using sponges. So you might want to combine the two of them, making natural paints and natural paint brushes. One of the other things you can do with plants, especially stinging nettles, is that you can actually make natural homemade paper as well. So this bottom left here, you do need to get a paper maker. You can use recycled paper, so you can cut up paper and mush it in with water and make a sludge, and then push it into the sieve here. It's like a square sieve with tiny holes, and then you shake out the water, and as the water comes down, you end up with that tiny mush of either plants or paper that then solidifies, and then you leave it to dry. Now you can do that with wholly plants, or you can do it with paper and then embed leaves and flowers and petals into the paper to make some beautiful natural homemade paper. On the bottom right here, we've also got jewellery. And I've said before about making necklaces using string going through leaves, but these are made out of elder. If you've got elder in your school grounds, it's a fantastic resource, but don't ever climb it. Rubbish for climbing, they just break off. But the branches are hollow, and there's a pith in the middle, a very soft pith, which you can push out with a tent peg. So using tools to saw up your stick and then pushing the pith out and then storing into smaller bits, you can then thread them through with string and make beads for necklaces. You can then color these, you can paint these, or you can even use a pyro pen, this thing on the top right here, to burn into it. So if you've got cookies, that's what that bit of wood is, so a cookie. And then if you've got a pyro pen, this is a gas pyro pen that I can use in the woods, so you don't need to be inside. This is for older students, so I wouldn't use it for anyone under key stage 3, key stage 1. Yeah, key stage 2, you can probably get away with it, but you need to make sure they don't touch any of the metal because it will burn them. But burning into wood provides them with a really fantastic effect, which of course will disappear in the rain, and you could create anything at all using that tip of that pen. If you also want to carve, you can use this technique in the middle here. So this is on a wooden spoon, but it could be on a cookie as well. And what I've done here is I've just carved a pattern in with just a craft knife. Again, knife safety required, and probably year 6s here. Creating this pattern. When you cut into the wood, you can't see it. You can't see where you're actually cutting, so you need to design it first. And then you just rub a spice on top of it, either turmeric or cinnamon, and then that darkness, that cinnamon, that one is, goes into the gaps, and then you rub it over with oil, so like walnut oil, and it goes shiny, and you see the darkness go into the cuts, and you get this beautiful effect that will last. It won't come off. It's waterproof as well. One of the other techniques that is mentioned in the considerations is architecture. And what I do, which is linked, of course, to the humanities AOLE, is look at architectural design in different styles of houses in the past. So this is a Roman fort that's being built here, but I've done half-tree Tudor houses. And quite often people do things like the Great Fire of London, but just bringing in the creative process to design it by doing some research, finding out what the houses were like, and then designing their own, going through the design process as an expressive arts context, can then build into the whole project in setting fire to it, etc., that you tend to do at the end. Next bit on art, of course, you can always use the outdoors as a inspiration for drawing. So the simplest thing is just drawing the plants. Now I love drawing flowers, and that is my favorite thing to draw, and it's a very meditative thing to do. But again, trying to be as realistic as you can is one way of doing it. So you can try and make sure that you've got the same number of petals, the same shaped leaves, the same colors, or you can use that abstract to try and, you know, generate different ideas, your representation of that plant or that flower. We can also use the colors in nature to print with as well. So I've said about making paints, but using the textures and the shapes, like in this picture here. So using those leaves to print, to actually make a piece of art using that as well. So almost like a template. So using that and building up that template, that shape, or whatever you're building, using that shape as a template. In your school grounds, you may have sculptures in there. And I know, unfortunately, with ash dieback, there's a lot of trees that are coming down. So if there's a possibility of them chopping them down, but not to the ground, if you can afford to get somebody to come in who is a chainsaw carver to carve into those, they're a fantastic source of inspiration for other pieces of art. Now there's a school I work with that did a fantastic project with some fantastic creative contributors, and they created their own sculptures as a school, and they actually carved them all out of wood, and they used their mindset logos. You know, everyone's got characters now for their growth mindset. They use those as inspiration for their pieces of art. So their sculptures now around their grounds are all covering their mindset Forest 4. And you can see where the children have actually made it themselves, but also now it's inspiration to create something else. So either tell a story or to use it to start another piece of artwork in a different form. So if you've got sculptures in your grounds, think about ways in which you can use them to inspire other creative arts, and other ways you can use them. It could be the texture of them doing rubbings. It could be the start of a story in a narrative for drama. But the fact that you've got that sculpture in your school grounds, think about ways in which you can integrate that into your planning, into your outdoor learning. On the bottom left, in the middle right here, this is just a mirror in the environment. I love doing this. It's a little task. You ask them to hide a mirror. Can you hide a mirror in the landscape? So taking a mirror, putting it outside, and then you take a photo. Somebody says if they can actually see where the mirror is. But it's also a really good way of exploring texture and reflection as well, and what happens to things when you reflect them, especially if you've got mirrors that you can actually bend. So you can change the shape of that texture, and that gives you an opportunity to take a photo of it to see how you've warped that texture that's in nature. So mirrors are a really, really fun way of exploring that. In the middle here on the left, we've also got mobiles. I love telling students we're going to make mobiles because they immediately think we're going to make phones. And this is just a woven willow circle at the top, and then found items dangled by raffia. Now, it's not as easy as it looks, because of course, if you've got a circle and you're dangling things down, then they need to balance. Otherwise you have a circle sitting upright, which isn't really what we're hoping for. So you could use this to create some really interesting wind chimes, as well as artists, art pieces of art as well, and thinking about where they should go and where's the best place to place them for exhibition. Sticking with the weaving, on the left here, we've also got willow, and this is a willow star. And if you've got willow on your school grounds, it's a fantastic free resource that you can use for actually weaving anything you like. Now, if you've got willow, if you want to weave it into a circle, you need to use your thumbs and press against it, but not press so much so you kink it. And what you're doing is you're breaking the internal fibers. And as you break them all the way along, it means the willow will naturally bend into a circle, and then you can weave it into a circle that you can then add other things into, so you can almost like a wreath. If you want to make sharp corners, then you snap it, but you don't snap it so that it comes apart. And that's what this star is about. And things like this star, if you use it when it's green, you can actually plant it and it will actually grow. So we got more on some willow here. So this bottom left, again, if you've got willow sculptures in your school grounds, there's some gorgeous ones here in the school I'm working with, this badger and this fox. But if you've got a willow dome that looks a bit like this, which needs a bit of TLC, then cutting off the smaller, newer branches, you can then use those to create your own arc sculpture. You can use them to make things like this, the wand that we just saw with the star on it, or you can cut them and place them and try to create your own sculpture in 3D. So as soon as you cut them, if you plant them before March, they will actually grow. So it's quite an interesting artwork because you've designed it with almost dead plants involved, and then suddenly it will grow into a living sculpture. So a fantastic opportunity to think about, oh, how's that grown? You know, how do I need to change that? Because that's not what I expected, because when I put it in the ground, they didn't have any leaves on it. On the top right, on the top left here, we've also got clay. Now, using clay, you probably use clay in school, but this links in an awful lot with some great history and humanities activities. So pinch pots from the Roman era and also from the Neolithic era. And of course, those pots were fired on a fire. So if you do have a fire circle, and you can use that to try and experiment with ceramics and pottery and trying to fire them, it's great to watch that process in front of you, because usually you put it into your kiln and it comes out and it's ready, but you can actually watch it happening here, and it's really interesting to see how it works. And if you get it closer to the fire, does it work better? And you've got to rotate them, so you're actually being involved in that firing process more if you're doing it on an open fire. And on the top right here, we've got dyeing. Now, there's lots of natural dyes that you can use. You can even make some with plants that are in your school grounds. This is dyed with woad. So this is when we were doing a project on the Celts. And woad, you can buy woad powder, or you can grow woad plants. You can see this kind of coppery deposition on the top of the water. That's the woad powder. And that material changes white wool, which is this, it needs to be 100% wool, into a blue. But the amazing thing is when it's in the bucket, it doesn't look very blue, but when it gets exposed to the air, it starts to change, and you can see it starting to get bluer and bluer, and it's an amazing stuff. If you grow your own woad, you can actually turn it into woad dye, but you need to find something to use that isn't wee, because that's what they used to use in the Celtic times to actually fix it. So I'm sure there's an alternative to wee that you can find now. Natural dyes, if you don't want to use woad, you can also use things like stinging nettles. They make really good green dyes, and onion skins make really good brown dyes as well. And it's great to use those colors in the environment and try and experiment with different ones. So on the bottom here, we've got just looking at repeating patterns with the colors and mirror imaging, but also you can actually use those to crush them and see if you can use those to actually create the different colors that you've got there. And you can use a bit of chromatography, a bit of science there to extract some of those as well. Other things you can do is you can use tree dressing. I know we do Christmas tree dressing, but if you've got trees in your school grounds, it's a great opportunity to dress them, especially linking it in with festivals. Gratitude trees are lovely. So making wood cookies and then using pyro pens to write a wish or a gratitude on it, and then hanging it on the tree. Then you can decorate the tree. You could even do what I showed you with the leaves and the roots on the bottom, and you can do a whole celebration around that, and it's a beautiful activity. One of my favorite art activities to do is this one on the right here. Again, this is focusing in on Neolithic times. Well, no, it wasn't Neolithic, would have been the Iron Age. So what we're doing here on the bottom right, you can just about see we've got cuttlefish bones. So what you need to do is carve a image into the cuttlefish bone, and you can use just a nail for that, or even your fingers. It's so soft. And then if you have an open fire, and you have to do this outside, just in a spoon, you heat up some pewter, and pewter doesn't have lead in it anymore, so you can't get leaded pewter, so it's quite safe, apart from the fact that it's boiling hot. You pour it into the mold, and then the mold will go into all the bits in your mold on your cuttlefish, and then put it into the water, and you end up with this beautiful silver shape. Now you can use this to create jewelry, so you can use it to create pendants. You can then file down any rough edges, because there will be rough edges. You can use it to make rings. If you put two cuttlefish bones opposite each other and put elastic band around it and you pour down, you can actually make a whole ring. Or you can use it to make things like spearheads. So what it really was used in the past. So it's a really great creative activity, and you can collect cuttlefish shells from the beach. You can even buy them online. On the left top here, we've got, this is pinhole photography. Now, my cousin is a world expert on pinhole photography, and he makes pinhole cameras out of everything from wheelie bins to rubbish bins to beer cans to everything. So you can do it with students, and all you need is the photographic paper, and you need to be able to develop it. And you don't actually necessarily need to have any chemicals, any darkroom or chemicals if you use the right paper. So you can use sun paper for this. So what you're doing is you're using the light to reflect through a tiny little hole, and you get a reverse image on the back of the pinhole camera. Now, pinhole cameras are a fantastic way of introducing photography, because students have no idea how photography works, because it's just a click of a phone or a click of a camera now. So just breaking down what's actually going on behind the scenes is really useful. And at the bottom here, we've got sun paper, which is paper which reacts to the sun. If you find natural items that have got some great background or textures, put them on it in the sun for a few minutes, then take it out of the sun, put it into water, it fixes it, and you get a lovely picture from the sun there. And then lastly, on the bottom right here, we've got kaleidoscopes. So putting tiny bits of different colors into a plastic pot that's got see-through on both sides, putting it into a tube, like a toilet roll tube, making a hole in the end so that you can see through just a tiny hole, then looking up, turning it around, you make lovely kaleidoscopes, and you can change what color you've got in there depending on whether you're going to use autumn leaves. On the top right here, there is a fantastic artist called James Brunt. If you follow him on Twitter, he creates these amazing natural ephemeral arts works with students and on his own as well. He goes into schools, and these repeating patterns that he uses are absolutely stunning. And it's a great way of inspiring students to do it. And it's really quite time consuming and quite difficult, because imagine every single one of those leaves is the same size and there's natural variation. It's very difficult to find that when you're looking in the woods, but really good exercise in mindfulness as well. Top left here, we've got natural picture frames. Again, you can put anything within these, but I love to celebrate form in nature. So finding things that give you a great background, and you can either use that with a black background of paper, or even just the yard, and either take photos of it, or you can lash it together and keep it. And then the last thing on the art itself, this picture here is this ink is actually made from that gall that you see there. So oak leaves, oak trees have a parasite that lives on them called gall wasps. And when they lay their eggs onto the branch of an oak tree, the oak tree want to scratch it, and obviously they can't scratch, they squirt this material on it to create this oak apple, this circle you can see there. That's just what they want, because that provides the nest for the wasp, the gall wasp. And after a while, the gall wasp makes this tiny little hole. Gall wasps are millimeters, 2 millimeters max. They burrow out of it and leave behind this gall. If you crush that and put it with some chemicals, you create this ink. And all of the medieval monasteries that did their writing and all of their documents were all written with this ink. And it's amazing because you write on it and it's really faint, but as the sun goes on it, it actually starts to get darker. Beautiful activity to do to create your own ink from galls. So this is just a list of all of those things that I've been through. So if you have, obviously, if you weren't writing it down, don't worry, I've got them all written down there for you. So as well as that, in the What Matters Statement 1, we also need to reflect on other artists. So there's a few artists here I just want you to draw your eye to, ways in which you can use the outdoors with these artists in mind. So the one on the left here, this is Cedric Morris. So these are all Welsh artists on this. So we're looking at the way in which creative arts have been influenced by the outdoors through these Welsh artists. So Cedric Morris was a painter who's born in Swansea, And he's inspired by his surroundings and by the Welsh valleys. And he used to paint landscapes, but he's also really well known for painting his flowers. So as well as being an artist, he's also a gardener. So he's got a really detailed look at these flowers. So sometimes if you're trying to draw flowers and you can see how detailed they are, it's amazing how detailed that some of the artists can draw them. At the other end of the spectrum, next to it, we've got Evelyn Lewis here, and his work is colourful and abstract. So again, he's focusing on landscape, but this time, what he says in his own words, he layers time after time until the upper layer explodes and transforms from its volcanic creation into a vivid landscape. So this is, yeah, just plastering more and more paint on top of each other. So very abstract use of paint there. The next one, this is Tim Pugh, a Welsh environmental artist, and he specializes in sculpture, photography, and design. So he creates elaborate artwork using the outdoors, and sometimes it's natural materials, sometimes it's man-made, and he uses nature to create their artwork, his artwork. And then lastly, we've got Barry Flanagan here, who's very famous for creating these hair statues, and there's actually one in New York. But again, using nature as form to provide you with the product of what you're actually going to create. So it could be animals that you're seeing, it could be plants that you're seeing. There's also other artists that aren't necessarily Welsh that provide you with great opportunities to compare yours and theirs. So we've got Da Vinci creating these amazing pictures of oak leaves and acorns. So again, if you want that detail, and I love this picture by Dürer, I think that's right, as a piece of turf, and just looking at the individual blades of grass and how much detail he's put into that, a very technically advanced piece of work. And then we go on to look at Van Gogh, and we're looking at different ways in which they use brush strokes to create the textures in large-scale landscape forms, especially things like trees. Or we can look at pointillism when we look at Siret here. So different ways in which different parts of the trees have been represented using different brush strokes can be done looking at different artists. There's so much out there. There's just a few that I wanted to mention. So we've got these almond trees here by Cézanne. Now these almond trees here use a special type of technique, which is called wet on wet drawing. So you've got your drawing and then you put watercolors on top. Great way of exploring different colors at autumn time. And then in the middle here, we've got these rosettes by William Morris. So these are wallpaper designs and tile designs. And again, we've got a repetitive pattern here. So this is a primrose at the bottom, a rosehip at the top. So trying to use just the form. So we're going simplistic now, the form of it, but in a repeating pattern. And this is things that you can, try and recreate using the materials and the plants you've got in your school grounds. And then on the right-hand side, a bit more abstract here, again, representing just the line, the form of the leaf, but using color to depict different things, maybe different seasons. I've seen some great artworks in schools where they've got 4 seasons and they do pictures using inspiration from the outdoors as a repeating pattern in all those 4 places to depict the different seasons. So some great opportunities to copy those artists online. Another really good source of art is books, and lots of the children's books that you might be reading sometimes just stop to look at the way the artist has depicted things, especially nature. And there's such a variety out there. This book here, The Little Gardener by Emily Hughes, is beautiful. And she's done very descriptive, very accurate pictures of individual flowers. Whereas if you look at this one, Me Jane by Patrick McDonnell, he's done much more simplistic and kind of illustrative representation of what these plants and these trees look like. So it gives everyone an option to use a different form. Also, the lost words, which I talked about when we did the literacy AOLE, has got amazing illustrations. This one in the middle of the dandelion, very correct. So again, very technically difficult, but it gives you that idea of the whole plant, and it's got all of the animals from the lost words have all been depicted in beautiful pictures. On the right here, we've got hailstones and halibut bones, which have got lovely poems, but also they're illustrated in this kind of oriental way, and some great borders as well, again, give you some inspiration. And then some other books that you might have used, like Fletcher and the Falling Leaves, it's got a different name in America, by Julie Rawlinson. Again, so a very simplistic use of brushstrokes there to make the tree and representing it in a slightly different way to the other books. So it's a really good way of just seeing, because you look at a tree and you think, I'm going to draw that. You just show them some examples of different ways of doing it. It's really nice. Okay, so moving on to dance. So when you're teaching dance, you need to use the outdoors, and it can be done using the natural world as inspiration for movement or space. And also you can celebrate it and share dances on a large scale. So remember, we need to include dance, performance, choreography, and appreciation. So we can combine dance movement with learning about animals. So this picture on the left here is them trying to be caterpillars, and so they're being obviously lots of legs, but they can then form that into a dance. You can also get them to observe animals and move like them, so move like ants in an ant nest, like caterpillars, like butterflies. You could also go through life cycles, the life cycle of the tree, what happens to the leaves as they go through the different cycles through the winter and autumn, and then life cycle of a caterpillar. I also teach my students flight school, so I teach them to fly like all the different animals, and they've got to have the right number of wings. So they've got to work together to have 2 pairs of wings, and then coordinate each other. So it's great in terms of coordination and communication. You can also get them to create leaf shapes out of their body, either individually or as a group, to get that identification, that sense of placement of their bodies. You can also mime geographical processes, so you can get them to form things like a meander. So you can't do that on your own. So they've got to form it and then role play as it changes over time. They could also do some mirror dancing as well. So they're copying the movement. You could copy the movement of each other. So one person moves an arm and the other person faces them and has to move the opposite arm. But you could also use the trees as an inspiration. So move like the trees. So as their wind is blowing more, you move more, and plants nearby. You could also use your body to see how the plants are actually growing. So obviously you've got trees growing in different forms, following those branches up and how they change over the autumn. Rain dances, you can either do it to stop the rain or to help make it rain. And there's lots of examples of those online that you can copy or you can make up your own. A way of using just your yard is doing something a bit like follow my leader. So you're following the lines on the paving and following those pathways. And as you go from one to another, you change what you're doing. So you move your hands or you run or you skip or you're dancing in a different way. A lovely one that I like is using hand movements to trace the shape of an object. So say you've got a leaf and you use your hands to go around it, and then you'll find that your hands are doing kind of similar movements that you find in Indian dancing. So using that as inspiration for a dance and trying to use the outdoors as an inspiration for that is lovely. And then on this slide here, I've got some more traditional uses of the outdoors for dancing. We've got St. David's Day here, which of course was yesterday, doing the dragon dance here, and we could do the Chinese New Year. We've also got Morris dancing and we've got maypole dancing. So naturally, these are all done outside. So if you're doing those dances, you're going to be using your outdoor space effectively. So those are all those ideas. Okay. Next, we're going to be, I just want to show you a quick video of fantastic use of your body for dance. So this is a murmuration. Now, murmuration is when birds flock together and move as one. And you can actually represent this through a dance. Now, I'm pretty sure I have to put this on a different share. So I'm just going to put a new share on. Stop that share. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. Okay. Video. Oh, sorry, let's watch the video. Okay, so hopefully you can see that, but you can see that they're just using their arms. Very simple movements, but very effective to show this way in which you could create a murmuration dance. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. It is mesmerizing, but I'm going to get back onto the PowerPoint. So that is on the Padlet. So if you want to watch more of it, then you can look at the Padlet. Right, so moving on to drama. So when it comes to drama, there's quite a few range of ways in which you can use the outdoors to teach it. And again, we need to cover the acting, the directing, the design, the technical, and the arts administration. So you can use the space and the wind to explore projection. So thinking about performance spaces, thinking about exploring the use of echoes, amphitheaters, trying to make sure that you stand in the right location. It's a good way of exploring projection. And it's harder to produce a projection outside. So it's a really good excuse for people to be very loud, to try it in different locations. You can also use it to create costumes. So we've got natural masks here, using camouflage and using natural materials to create masks. Also other costumes. So we've got a crown here, so using natural materials to create crowns. You can also do stage design. So this bottom middle here is a stage design that you could create. So again, using the natural landscape behind you as a backdrop to create your design, and then trying to then recreate that in the real life as well on a large scale. But it gives you that option to make a model of your design before you start doing it big as well. Muddy faces. Lots of people do this in forest school, but it's a really good opportunity to explore character and expression, especially if you're using clay. You can really start to get those expressions onto the face. So if you're trying to think about a character in a story that you're going to dramatize, thinking about the different ways the narrative is affecting it, you could change the shape of that face so that you can think about, right, okay, he's going to look grumpy, right? What do I do with his face to make him look grumpy? Right, okay, I need to try and recreate that on my face now. So it's almost like a mirror that you're trying to copy. So using it as a model for expression and emotion is a great way of moving on from just making another clay picture. Now, storytelling and creative storytelling can be done outside really easily, because you can use the audience or the participants to be things like the sound effects. They can use items around them to create sound effects, or they can say what happens next. You also can use the outside as your backdrop, as a landscape for the scene. So if you're starting a story and this dramatic story, what's behind you, what's going to tell you where this is, you know, and then you can use that as the character, as another character within your scene. It can also be the inspiration for the plot. So it could be that you walk around your school grounds and you're finding items that end up being props in your story, or parts of the characters, or even characters. So if you're doing puppet shows like we got here, you could provide puppets, or they could find things that can be the puppets within the puppet show. So they can either make them themselves, or they can use things and say, right, okay, this represents something in my story. You can also create tableaus. So if you're trying to design a story, a dramatic narrative, and you don't want the whole play to be done, it's really good to get them to just come up with 3 tableaus of frozen images to tell the story. So the beginning, middle, the end. So they're not going to do a whole play, because sometimes you have a 20-minute play for each group and then it takes the whole session. But if they just have 3 tableaus, so the beginning of the story, they need to stand at show us the tableau, and we need to work out what the story is. And then they do a second tableau, which is the middle of the story, and a third tableau, which is the third. And we try and decipher the story based on their tableau. The other way of using tableaus is, again, try and create a tableau that is like a role-playing scene. So it could be a scene in a hospital. And then you put 3 members of your class in this scene, and then other members need to join the scene as parts of the tableau, and they need to consider things about their positioning. So if everybody's lying down, maybe they could be standing up. If everyone's standing up, maybe they could be crouching. Think about their position. Are they going to be behind somebody so they can't be seen? Think about where your audience is. So it gives a really good momentary looking at positioning, because when you're acting, it's easy to just get caught up as it's all moving so fast, and tableaus get you to freeze time and say, right, we're stopping here, look, you're behind there, right, let's move you there. And these tableaus give them opportunity to get into the right position. So these are all the ideas that I've said here. So again, you've got all those ideas on the PowerPoint. Right, next thing is looking at film and media outdoors. That's the 4th of the 5 disciplines. And I really love this one. And it's a great opportunity to really use any digital device that you've got. So to cover the film and media content of the curriculum, we need to cover all those things I said: TV, film, radio, games, design, and photography. So there's a huge amount that you could cover. You don't have to cover it all. One of the ones I really like is the sound aspect of it and audio production. So recording a soundscape clip. So what you could do is go around your school grounds and take recordings of key sounds and then create QR codes. And then your other members of your class then look at the QR codes, listen to the sound, and they can either try and work out where the sound recording was taken, or try and find what the thing was that made the recording. So if you're tapping two sticks together or tapping two stones together. So you can use that as a kind of go find it. So I'm going to play you a sound and you go and find what I've found, or you could do it as a sound map. So all around your school grounds, put these QR codes so that when you get there, you record that, you scan that, and then you listen to it. And what can you hear, and what is it that you can hear in the ground in real life? I also love the idea of making your own sound effects. So making a radio play. It was always said that the Archers only had one cow, and it's amazing what sound effects. I heard a fantastic radio program about making sound effects, and making the sound effects for a radio play can be a really great way of just thinking about sound as an art form. So you could write the script, but all think about how we're going to represent these sound effects. Now you could open a gate to make open a gate, but think about things that aren't the same. So how can we make walking down a pathway with stones when we haven't got a pathway with stones? How can we try and recreate that sound? And there's some really interesting uses of weird, unnatural and natural materials to recreate some of these natural sounds. You can also make a film trailer. So I'm just going to show you my film trailer that I used. Again, I've done a YouTube video on how to do this. So using the landscape as your backdrop, but also using Scott Coucher, you can use that, or you can use people. So I'm just going to show you my trailer and see what you think. so that didn't take me very long to do, but it just gives you an idea of what you could do, incorporating the landscape as backdrop to your story, animation or stop capture or just moving things, but also the sound effects. I've obviously plagiarized and completely stolen from those films, but if you're creating your own, then you can create your own sound effects, and it gives a great project. And doing it outside is I think it brings, you know, much better backdrop. You can use green screens, a lot of people do, but what about using the actual landscape? The other thing is still walks. Now, there's a guy called Alistair Duncan who does these amazing still walks. And if you look on his website, you can see what a still walk is. And I'm just, yeah, I've just got time. I'm just going to quickly show you one of his still walks. I'll just have to change sharing again. So what it is, a still walk, is you walk, but in fact, you just video what you see, or you take photos and you take sound recordings and you put it together with poetry and images. It could be pictures, and you edit it all together.
Swishing through the glistening fields, glass beads threaded on blades of grass. The grass as green as a cricket, as green as the alien planet, as green as my eyes. See glittering glimpses of the pond, a spinny spider, cowpats and cowpastures sleep in sheep, and ivy shaped like my hand. Watch out for the nasty nettles, spiky spines of the brambles, slimy slug, the bad barbed wire. Taste blackberries, each one as small as the nib of a pen. See an acorn case of berries cut, a pheasant flying over a mossy stile, a slippery stones really deep, and muddy, muddy, muddy mud.
So that's what a still walk is. So it's a great opportunity to provide editing skills, but you use the images that they've created from this walk, and then you put the sound effects in, and then anything creative. They could do poetry, they could do pictures, and it's a lovely thing to actually create as an end product, as a creative process. Again, the where Hadlet has got his website on, so you can look through things that he's done, and it may not be as good as his, obviously, because you won't have the sound recording material equipment that he has, but you can do it just with a phone nowadays, and with an iPad, and it's a great thing to actually create. Sticking with the photography, of course, you can do photography in school grounds. If you've got anything in your school grounds that you photograph, but it doesn't have to be on a large scale, so it doesn't have to be a panorama, but it could be something on a macro scale. So it could be looking at something very small. Moss is a great thing to photograph. The photograph at the very beginning of this presentation is of a tiny mushroom on the top of a fence post. Beautiful. And that was just on my phone. So you don't have to have lots of big lenses to go in. You could also create a photo trail. I like to create a photo trail around my school grounds, and then do it in one season, and then get them to try and find the location in another season, and they've got to re-photograph. So they've got to find out exactly where I took that photograph and take it again in that different time of day or different time of the year. On the right down here, a really good way of engaging your learners is looking at computer games and game design. Now, there's two ways of doing that. So they could look at a game that they use inside. So a lot of them use Minecraft, and see if they could recreate that outdoors. And there is actually an outdoor form of Minecraft that you can create, but they could think about the costumes, but also think about how they're going to turn blocks. We can't make blocks of wood outside, but we could use building with sticks to make dens, thinking about the chests and what items you want to put in it. So it brings their knowledge of Minecraft into the real world. The opposite way of doing that is to design a game outside and then turn it into an online game that you can use on a computer. So using programming, so you're turning your game into an online game, a computer game. Making outdoor music videos, again, using the outdoors, or using music. We'll look at music next, but also using the outdoors as a backdrop to your music video. And virtual reality. walking around your school grounds with your phone or camera, you can video somewhere you want to take them, and then if you can turn that into VR, all you have to do is get one of those boxes that you put an iPad or a phone in it, and then you stand inside and somebody can go on a virtual experience through your school grounds. So, and make it interesting, of course. You've got to go under things or through bushes, etc. And then lastly, I've got a wildlife documentary. Now, making a wildlife documentary not only tests your skills as a photographer, because you've got to get close enough to wildlife, which is difficult, but also you need to have some knowledge because you need to document about the wildlife. So it brings into those skills of researching, but also trying to learn a bit about the animals and plants that you're going to be documenting as well. Ooh. Right. The last of the 5 disciplines, the last one we're going to go through, is the music section. So making natural music. Now, outdoors provides its own orchestra of sounds, of course, which you can use, but you can also use materials out there to make your own natural instruments, such as we've got wooden xylophones. So we've got ones here. If you dig a hole that's rectangular and you put sticks on top of the hole, which is just above it, you can get some nice xylophone. If you do it on the ground, there's nothing to reverberate. So you need space, you need a sound box, but it doesn't take too much to just dig a hole and put sticks on the top of it. You can, so with those materials you've got here, some of these you might find in your school grounds, but then others obviously you might have to bring in. So making like wind chimes, we've got, these are just old bits of metal, and metal makes really nice wind chimes. But xylophones, you can also use glass jars as well, or you can use glass with water in them to make water xylophones as well. There's wind chimes that you can make using just wood as well, if it's hitting against something, and also in trees. There's lots of materials, metals, etc., can make some nice wind chimes. And also percussion instruments, drums, but also shakers, loads of different instruments you can make, and some of them using some nice little tool activities. So for example, these ones here on the left here, this is a kazoo, and to make a kazoo you can do it in 2 ways. You can do it using elder or bamboo, and you all have to do is drill a hole in the middle and make sure there's a hole going all the way through the stick, and then you put greaseproof paper over the top, and then you hold it in place with elastic bands and you just blow through it. Or with this one that this girl's opening, it's been split down the middle, and then you cut a little gap and in both sides, put it back together, put elastic bands through the middle of it longitudinally, put it together, then put elastic bands to hold it together, and you blow through the middle and you have a reed there. So you've got a kazoo. Kazoos are great because everyone can make a tune out of a kazoo. On the right here, we've got whistles, again, a bit more technical. So year 6 probably, but in springtime when the sap is rising, you can make whistles out of sycamore sticks, and depending on the size of your stick, you make different pitches, and you can even make ones that are for owls and ones for little birds, so you can make a little orchestra there. And in the middle here we've got our drum kit, and of course it doesn't have to be a drum kit to be like that, but nature will provide lots of opportunities to make percussion. So what can we actually do? We can do some recording of the soundscape. So if you've got a map, again, I've said about recording things and then putting them out there, but you could also do repetitive things. So you could repeat sounds that you hear. So if you're listening to the birds, you can repeat them using materials that are out there. So it could be just percussion, looking at tempo, or you could try and mimic melodies, melodies of the wind, melodies of the bird. What I like to do is to have a whole band, so they're all just using something, and then I conduct it and they explore dynamics. So I'm going crescendo and they have to get louder and then quieter, and they have to follow the conductor, and that gets them really thinking about watching the performance and not just bashing away. And then you can do repetitive sounds, so you put in some rhythms and they've got to copy the rhythms. You can also have these short repetitive musical patterns, this ostinato. And so thinking about your school grounds and what repeating patterns you have all the time, you know, you could have a fan that's going around all the time. You could have a something else in your school ground which has got this repetitive sound, and think about repetitive phrasing and how you could use that and incorporate another sound on top of that to build up layers of sound. A performance, again, using the wind to determine your tempo. So as the wind gets faster, you'll go louder, or as the wind gets quieter, you go quieter, or you go faster or slower. And so you're not in control of the speed of or the dynamics of your performance. You can look at exploring sequence. So you can use random sequences. So you can place just little snippets of sound, so just a little melody, and then you can see when you stand on a different landscape, for example, for a different landform, you change it. So if you go on the grass, you change pitch. When you go onto a different surface, you change the rhythm. When you hit a building, you have to rewind and do the melody in reverse. So just using that for your composition. You could also create different rhythms or melodies for different items. So collect different items, put them in a line, and each one has a slightly different melody. And then you slide up and down and touch each one. And then as you touch it, you have to say that melody. So you're composing from those different ideas. You can also, if you want to, with the older ones, thinking about determining the pitch of sounds that you find outside. You can measure the decibels, the noise reading, but the pitch, you can only work that out by having an instrument and listening and see if you can repeat that pitch there. Making instruments I've said about, but also wind chimes, again, natural wind chimes or man-made ones. Making soundscapes, so looking around and trying to work out what's making that sound. And a great way of thinking about notation. Now, obviously, we've got notation with music, but coming up with your own form of notation, think about the sound you hear, right? What does that bird sound like? What would I draw to depict the sound of that? And then when you're recording it, you're actually creating your own notation and then repeating it and thinking about the structure and the rhythms of those and trying to put that notation in as well. And then bringing all that together, you could create a sound trail. So you place items along a trail, which can make music, or they can try and make music out of them. Could be instructions on how to make sound out of them. You could build your own listening pod. So thinking about acoustics and how to have barriers to external noise, you could create a place. It could be inside a willow tunnel, it could be inside tarps, somewhere where you can stay and listen to music. You can investigate echoes and acoustics around your school ground. What's the best place to actually stand to perform music? Or create a sound garden. So bringing all that together, you have a music trail into your garden with a composing pod, and then a listening pod and a performance area. And using whatever natural materials you have then. So like this picture on the bottom right, this is a leaf storm, so making natural music. At the top here, this is a music area here, but a lot of those make really good music when the rain comes. So we can make water songs or rain songs. So going around recording what happens when the rain lands on different materials. And then making a whole band using all this, and then exploring your sound, your whole space to find the best place for a performance. So to meet the what matters statements with all of these activities that I've given you, you've got to make sure that you give your learners time to explore the stimuli for the arts. So in this case, it's the natural world, and also reflect on how artists have been inspired by or depicted nature in their creative works, and then compare their creative work to other artists, the ones they've created, and consider the mood that they're trying to communicate through their creative work. Right, so those are all the ideas I came up with for the Expressive Arts AOLE. I'm going to stop sharing. Before I give you a chance to go into breakout rooms, has anyone got any questions? Nope. Okay, right, I'm going to put you into some breakout rooms. So when it comes up, if you can click on it, then you can have a few minutes to talk. So what I want you to do is just talk about what we've been through today. Is there any ideas that you want to take away with you and try? And also if there's any creative activities you've done using the outdoors that you want to share with each other. I'll just give you about 7 minutes, and then that'll give me a few minutes just to go through the last little bit. So if you can, oh, sorry, let me recreate. There's a lot of rooms there with one people in. That's not very good. So hopefully there. So if you can click on a room, I'll give you 5-7 minutes see what you found useful that you want to share, or any ideas you've used. And I'll see you in a few minutes. So hopefully that was useful. It's nice to talk to other people. I did go into a couple of rooms, and the things that people were saying was that it's reminded them of stuff they've done in the past and forgotten about. So if that's useful, then that's great. But obviously, you know, thinking of going future, these students haven't necessarily done this then if you haven't done it for a while, but it's all experimenting. So the great thing about expressive arts is you can't go wrong. So as long as they're exploring, they're experimenting, that's what's important. I'm just going to share the last few slides. This is just looking at the support that I can give you. So that's what you've been discussing, is how you can share your ideas. If you are challenged and you want to get some challenge cards, I've got my challenge cards, and the expressive arts ones are available on my Niche shop, but also I've got the whole set, which is £50 for all AOLEs. My subscription service is going to start soon, I promise. And the Padlet is here. And if I show you the Padlet, you can see where stop sharing that. I'll show you where I've put the expressive arts. So if you go to the Padlet here, at the very end, we've got expressive arts here. So there's the commemoration. There's some really nice artists by themes, the Still Walks, and some Creative Outdoors by NRW, and the orchestra that I told you about. But also, if you haven't seen this Padlet, all of the AOLEs, all the resources from the last 10 weeks are all down here, including stuff on health and safety, outdoor learning, etc. So you'll get a link to this, but you can have a look at that anytime as well. Let me just go back to there. And then lastly, if you want to just remind yourself of what's going on and what you heard today, obviously you can listen to the recording again, but also best way is to try and integrate some of those outdoor learning ideas into your teaching of expressive arts to make it more meaningful for you and your learners, and taking what you need for your curriculum. And if you've enjoyed, or even if you haven't enjoyed today, I really would love you to give me some feedback. So there's a feedback form. You can scan the QR code, or when you get this PowerPoint, please click on the feedback form. It also provides me with ideas of what new or other aspects of outdoor learning you want me to do some training in. Also, I'm doing some repeats of some of this course already. So if this is the first course you've been on, the first session you've been on, next week, I'm doing the Science and Technology AOLE again as a repeat. If you've booked on all 20 courses and you didn't make that one, you can also attend that one again for free. And next week in this session, in this course, we're doing the Health and Wellbeing AOLE in 2 weeks' time. So that's on the 16th of March. And then that course will be carrying on until July. So if you do want to do all 20 of the sessions and you've missed some, then you can still purchase them and you'll get recordings for all the rest of them. And anytime I repeat them, you will also get free attendance to those as well. So that's pretty much spot on. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to say them. If you want to stay behind and chat about anything, you're very welcome, or put anything in the chat. If you need to go, thank you so much for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope it's given you some ideas for teaching expressive arts outdoors. So hopefully see you next week or the week after. Thank you.